from the heart of rural France. This is the Keto Woman podcast, brought to you by me. Hello Keto Lovelies, I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight, after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. I've been keto now for over 2 years, and it has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs under 20 grams a day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds and the incidental carbs you find in things like full fat dairy. Choose delicious fatty proteins and be free and easy with oily dressings on salad and butter on your veggies. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalized keto. You'll hear all sorts of ways to keto from my guests. There is no one way to do keto, no one size fits all. I hope to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we really can't give you medical advice. It's always best to consult your own doctor when making big changes to your diet and lifestyle, because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. Wouldn't it be helpful to have one place where you could find all the links? Want to sign up to my new Patreon exclusive Facebook group, Daisy's Lovelies? No problem. How about subscribing to my YouTube channel? Please help me notch up my first 1,000 subscribers by going to links.ketowomanpodcast.com and following the YouTube link. Not following me on Instagram yet? Hit the Instagram button. You get the idea. All the buttons, all the links you need are at links.ketowomanpodcast.com. Thank you, Carl Schluter, for supporting me and this podcast by making a pledge at my Patreon page. Do you want to hear your name here at the top of the show? Are you enjoying this podcast and would like to help me make more episodes? Then head over to my Patreon page at patreon.com/KetoWoman or hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. It means a great deal to me, and you will get to headline the show just like Carl did today. Thank you for tuning in to episode number 109, where I talk to extraordinary man Colin Stuckert of Wild Foods. If you've been listening to the last few episodes, you will recognise them as being a sponsor of this podcast. As with many of the companies in our keto orbit, the founder has great passion and drive and an interesting story of his own. So I thought you would like to hear from Colin and what led him to start Wild Foods. Colin's story actually began as a professional poker player out of college, where he was able to make enough money on his computer in the wee hours of the morning to invest in a small juice bar inside of an LA Fitness. The first business wasn't enough, and he continued his entrepreneurial journey, starting a CrossFit gym just a couple of miles down the road. It became the largest CrossFit gym in the local area and is still running today. Colin started blogging and writing soon after starting the gym and gained a passion for content and content creation. Colin's passion for writing continued to flourish, and he published 7 books while growing his blog at gymlife.com. It was around here that he realised Florida, and Southwest Florida in particular, did not have the infrastructure he needed to change the world. His plan was to visit Austin, San Francisco and Denver to decide on where he could begin working on his vision, but he didn't make it past Austin. He signed a lease within a couple of days and put in his first order for what would become Wild Foods in October of 2014. Within 6 months, Wild Foods had a booth on the floor of the biggest paleo conference in the world, Paleo FX. The feedback was amazing, even drawing a specific compliment from Mark Sisson, a hero of Colin's, saying that Wild's packaging was amazing and they were onto something. Colin grew the team from just him to 25 employees in 2018. It is his mission that has made his brand a success, the Wild Mission, where they believe real food is medicine and that education is the world's greatest asset. Welcome, Colin, to the Keto Woman podcast. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great.
Well, it's nice to meet you.
You too.
I haven't been chatting directly with you yet. I've been chatting to Brent, but yes, it's nice to finally meet you.
As well. Thanks for having me.
So tell me a bit about you.
Well, right now I'm here in Austin, Texas in the Wild Studio. And, the audience will learn about Wild Foods and what we do. We also sponsor your show. So that's a new development. And so we're excited for that. We're trying to find like-minded people that are promoting health and wellness and all these, these ideas around ancestral health. What we do out of Wild Foods is, for me, when I got into health and fitness and I kind of got the bug and I got obsessed with it and I started doing a lot of research, I made the connection between quality of ingredients and my health and performance, right? I was doing CrossFit at the time. So that was a big, performance and recovery and all those things mattered a lot. And I wanted to basically be the best I could. And so I was researching all the different things and I kept coming back to food being one of the primary drivers for all of it, right? And when I made the connection that the better food I ate, the closer to nature it was, the better I did. And, long story short, that's really, that single idea is why we're here today.
Where did you start off? You say you're interested in CrossFit. So how were you eating before? What led you down the path you're on now?
Started way back, in high school, got into like fitness and the bodybuilding thing. That was kind of the popular thing at the time. So I was doing that for a while, was eating what I thought was healthy, which, would include like bread and grains and pasta and just stuff here and there. And, not great energy supplements and just like all of it. Like I tried it all. And, I was frustrated by lack of progress, to be honest. I was in the gym, multiple hours a day. I was probably overtraining, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then one day I just happened to cross this thing called CrossFit. And like, that was really one of those aha moments. And, I dived deeply into that. That introduced me eventually to the zone diet, which then introduced me to paleo. And then when I got into paleo, I was like, whoa, like this is the thing, and then from there, I was very dogmatic about it in the beginning. And then I've kind of opened up a little bit, like certain kinds of dairy, I think are okay for some people. And like, I'm a little bit more open to just enjoying some grains here and there. Like, I don't like to be too dogmatic about it. But if you were to ask me if I'm eating these certain foods, whether they're going to be good for me or not, or even things like, okay in moderation, I would probably tell you that I disagree with that, even if I'm to partake in it myself, right? Because like none of us are perfect, but I still do have a solid belief around the things that are good for the humans and those that are not. And generally, a lot of the foods that are excluded from paleo, primal, ancestral diet are just not, they're toxic to the human body. Like it's just kind of what it comes down to, and so I'm not under any illusion about that. And I see a lot of people going back and forth in the diet wars about that and like what's acceptable, what's moderate, and what's in moderation. And a lot of that's based on a lot of really bad ideas, to be honest.
And there's a lot of crossover, isn't there, between paleo and keto, and a lot of
right.
mix in between. I like to ask my guests what their keto looks like, but I guess what does your paleo look like? What does an average day look like? For
me, I call it, for lack of a label, I try to call it real food. Like if I had to call it something, it was real food. So if you decided to do like a keto-based diet that was lower in carb, and some people do better in that. Like some people are more carb intolerant. Like they don't do as well. Some people do a little bit better with a little bit more carbs, right? I think no matter what, though, when you break it down to first principles, which is a lot of what we talk about in the Ancestral Mind podcast, and it's a lot of what I just think about on a daily basis, it's like, what are the first principles here? Well, if you go in the wild and you try to find a lot of carbs, you're going to have a hard time, right? Our ancestors were not farmers. They were hunter-gatherers. And to produce a lot of carbs in nature, you'd have to farm for the most part, right? Other than the fact that a lot of carbs are cyclical and different areas, right? So like if you get into things like, if your ancestors lived around the equator, there's usually a lot more fruit available more often, right? So maybe you do a little bit better. Maybe your genes will respond a little bit better with more carbs or more fruit, et cetera. My ancestors were probably in northern climates and there was not a lot of fruit or carbs for that matter available, right? And if it was available for a short window.
Yeah.
And of course we would have eaten as much as we could, but that
Fatten
would
you
just
up for the
fatten
winter.
up for the winter. Right. These are the things that I like to go back to. I like to understand the human story and I like to understand how food played a role in our history, because then I can make decisions today. So like, I've been actually doing a lot of white rice lately. Not a lot. I mean, like when I say a lot, it's like half a cup or whatever. But because I'm generally more lower carb, when I'm eating that rice, I do recognize that I'm eating more carbs than average. But it's like yesterday I played 2 hours of racquetball. So, right, I was tired. It gave me a little recovery boost or whatever. But it's just one of those things that for those that are doing keto or any diet for that matter, you have to cycle things up. One of the first principles of human biology is variability, right? Variability of nature, of foods available, of just everything. And anytime you can cycle it up, I think that's going to be a benefit. And when it comes to keto, you see people that are like pretty dogmatic about like it being 100% of the time. But I actually think cyclical keto is probably the most ancestrally appropriate for most people. So just, it's just something to think about for people that get a little bit too, single-minded in their diet recommendations.
Yeah, and I'm all for experimenting. And funnily enough, somebody I was talking to the other day was saying that she does a similar thing just with some good quality carbohydrate type foods. Not exactly what you'd call a carb up, but just a little bit every now and then is something that she found works really well for her. I could talk to somebody else and it could be the kind of thing that they would try and it would just send them on a complete carb binge. So it wouldn't be the right thing for them. And this is what I love. This is why I like to ask people what their keto or whatever their diet, their way of eating looks like, because I like to show the listeners just how variable it can be.
Absolutely.
And finding what works for you is what's important.
Yep, totally.
So the whole ancestral point of view, tell us a bit more about that, because I know that's something that obviously influences what you do, but it influences your business and your whole life and belief system around food, nutrition, exercise, I imagine, everything. So, and you've got some really interesting things to say about that. I think the listeners would find really interesting and helpful.
Yeah, I know. How much time do we have? That's the problem. It does. It influences everything. And in fact, it influences how we're raising our son, who is now 15 months old.
Right.
We are actually moving to an hour, 45 minutes outside of Austin to a 10-acre farm homestead, basically. And like that's the final frontier for us for, living a lot of these ideals of being as close to nature as possible. We're gonna raise our own food, grow our own food, be outside as much as possible. And it's going to be definitely a different way of life than like right now I'm in Austin and like there's skyscrapers are building all around me. There's cars, there's people, there's everywhere. And I like the city. I like being around people, but I also like being removed from it and getting, back to nature. And I don't get outside enough. I don't get sun enough. And I want my son to grow up more biologically aligned, like better for his genes. And so to the ancestral point, it's for people that this might be new because this is a keto show. So, you don't always get paleo, primal, or ancestral ideas, but they are very aligned, like you said. So
absolutely.
I'll just give kind of a brief overview. Up until about 10 to 11,000 years ago, all humans, all Homo sapiens, which is modern anatomical humans, lived as hunter-gatherers in the wild, right? And as the population grew, and as humans, more technology and population pressure and all these different things that kind of even the environment changing from more of an ice age to warmer climates, it allowed our species to be able to specialize and then build things like cities and fundamentally farming, which is what allowed for all of it, right? Like we wouldn't have 8 billion people on the planet today if we lived in the wild and we had to wander around every day looking for food. It just wouldn't be sustainable that way. In fact, there's a lot of speculation about why humans started farming, because the hunter-gatherer way of life was actually a really good life. They speculate that we probably worked an average of 23 hours a week. Obviously, we'd be moving a lot and doing a lot of different things. But the farmer, when we started settling down as farmers, we had to work for more hours for less calories and more malnutrition. And you had things like famine and all these different things. The hunter-gatherer lifestyle was one of those things that was just better off, right? And so some historians believe that it's probably because of an access to alcohol, which is kind of funny, right? Because you needed the hops and the grains to have alcohol all the time. And so the speculation is kind of like, well, we really liked alcohol and we wanted to have a way to have it consistently forever. So we decided to start farming, right? And, that's a lot of speculation there. But for whatever reason, around 10 to 11,000 years ago, we started moving more into city as farmers, right? And farmers supported cities. And then we got into things like trade and specialization. And, before then, you couldn't be like a blacksmith and produce something and specialize in that because you'd have to get food, and everyone was kind of egalitarian. We all had to get food and we all had to contribute. But when we moved into cities on the backbone of farming, we were able to specialize. And then that just created like money and writing and language and all the things that you get from then. It allowed for our modern civilization. So I'm grateful we did that because I love the modern world. But our body and our genes is not caught up to the way we live today. And then you get the idea of the mismatch principle, which is really the fundamental idea behind why you would look at something like ancestral health. Humans are designed to live as hunter-gatherers in the wild, right? Yet today we live in these modern man-made environments. And so you get all of the health implications that come with that. And you can see it everywhere. Like I sleep in four walls. I stay in four walls most of the time. My ancestors were outside all the time, right? I would hear birds chirping and there'd be sounds. And I would see lots of green. Now I see like lots of gray, and there's lots of sound pollution. There's light pollution. Every single thing that we do in a modern environment is almost universally the opposite of what our ancestors would have done. And that is really the foundational principle that I try to think of on a daily basis for everything.
Have you read the Piopi diet?
What is it? The POP?
Piopi diet. Yeah, it's a book written by, can't think of the authors off the top of my head, which is embarrassing, but I will add that in later. This is me later. The Piopi diet was, of course, written by Asim Malhotra and Donald O'Neill. And there is also a film covering the same subject called The Big Fat Fix. I've put links to both in the show notes. They were interested in this place called Piopi in Italy, where the people live a really long time.
Yeah.
And so they went there to find out, what is it about these people that makes them live longer?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the things you were saying. Actually, a lot of these people don't eat a huge amount. They eat particularly, I guess, the Mediterranean diet. So a whole foods diet, basically.
Mm-hmm.
They're moving quite a lot. They're outside. They're doing things like chopping down firewood and lugging
Gardening.
it around. So this mix of different kind of natural movements outside, socializing, quite often, interestingly, that they don't eat breakfast. So there was a bit of kind of intermittent fasting going on there, and a large number of the population living past 100 years old. So really, really interesting. So I think there's a lot to be said for what you're saying.
Yep, because they're a bit closer to the way our ancestors live, and they probably have certain technologies. Maybe they have electricity and running water and whatever, but they're still getting outside. They're doing things, they're moving, they're eating foods that are closer to nature, that are closer to how our ancestors would have eaten. And that's really what it's all about. It's not about replicating living in the wild. Like, you don't have to go live in the wild, but you need to bring the wild to you as much as you can, and get to the wild as much as you can.
Yeah. And tell us how to do that, because you talk about getting back a bit to how our ancestors lived. But obviously, as you said, we like living in the modern world. We like the advantages it offers us. But so how can we remedy a little bit that mismatch that's going on?
Yeah. And what's great about this is you can actually get a lot done. Like, small changes in your daily habits can have extraordinarily large effects, especially consistently over 10, 20 years. And that's how people have to think. Our ancestors weren't good at thinking long term. They were in the now, they were in the wild. They had to worry about where their next meal was coming from, right? So it didn't really benefit them to think like long term, or to think like, even today, like the way people spend money. Not everybody is like Warren Buffett, who thinks like, I'm going to be rich in 50 years. For most people, they can't even comprehend that, right? Same thing with health. People still smoke cigarettes, even though we understand what it does, right? It's a short-term thinking. It's a short-term fix. And that's one of those things that when I get too judgmental about things, I try to remind myself, like, our biology is literally designed to be addicted to foods that are available by these food companies that aren't even good for us. Like, they've been engineered to be addicted to us, right? We have things like nicotine and short-term, dopamine producing things. Like, everything in our modern world is basically designed to keep us addicted, and thus fat and sick over the long term, right? And so, think long term. That's one of those first principles. But when it comes to the things you can actually do, I actually have the 7 principles of living wild over at theancestralmind.com. It's a short little PDF. I'll kind of go through those right now, but these are kind of the big things that every human needs to focus on. They're universals for humans. And so the first one I usually do is real food. Food is just one of the primary ways that we interact with our environment. The closer to nature food you can have, the less processed, the more real. It should go bad. There's just, the better food, the better you do. That's just one of those big first principles. And there's a lot of different rabbit holes to go down into that, like whether you're doing keto or high carb or low carb, whatever, carnivore, plant-based, for the most part, the better quality food you eat, the better you're going to do. It's just one of those things, right? And then the second one after that is going to be sleep. Sleep is the other really, really big part of the human. Like, we would have slept when the sun went down. We had no choice. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have candles, right? So we pretty much went to sleep, and then we would wake up when the sun came up. Then you get into things like circadian rhythm, etc. For me, I was actually always a night owl. So some things that I did that I recommend everyone do is get a sound machine and make sure you block out your windows. If you're up at night at all, sleep as late as you can because you're better off with more sleep than less. But generally, try to go to bed earlier and wake up earlier. Like that's something that now that I have a son, I've definitely been changing.
You haven't got
myself.
much choice about it.
I don't have much choice, right? But 35 years old, I might as well finally get it right? So sleep's a really, really.
You
big
mentioned
one.
a sound machine. What kind of sound?
Sound machine. There's ones that have a fan. There's a Mark Pack, and it has an actual spinning fan. And then I even recently found one that was a digital one that replicated fan. They both work great. And if you travel at all, anybody that travels, I always throw one or two in my suitcase. Right, that's amazing. But even at home, if I don't have it on, it's just night and day. Especially now, when my son might be up and she's taking care of him, I might sleep a little bit longer. Like it's just the best thing, the best $40 you ever spend in your entire life.
That's interesting. What's the principle of that working then? Because you would think that silence would be the best thing.
Right. Well, I've thought about this a lot. You could go into the research a little bit, but here's the thing. If you're in the wild, is it ever quiet?
Well, actually, I live in the middle of nowhere in rural France, and it is pretty quiet. It's something that people comment on, but yeah.
Are you like in the woods? Or are you like in a field? Because like there's always animals, and in fact, a lot of times at night, a lot of animals will come out, and there'll be crickets chirping. There'll be
that's
the
very
wind
true.
busting the leaves.
Depends on the time of year.
Sounds, right? It won't be modern sounds, but there's still going to be sounds.
Yeah.
And so I assume some of that is kind of like the white noise that helps with that, but also for me, it's just like blocking out other sounds. I'm a light sleeper, and if I hear other not natural sounds, my natural biology is to be like, what happened? Right? Is there danger? Is there something coming for me? Right? So, it's just amazing. I if you've never tried it, I highly recommend everyone try Sound Machine. Yeah. Like it's really, really incredible. And so that's the first principle for human health. And then there's a few more, but for the most part, those are the two big ones. I guess the third one would be, get outside and get sunlight for vitamin D production. That's the other really big thing. And obviously if you're getting outside, you'd be moving. So that kind of takes care of the movement part, but those are the really big ones. It's like getting outside, moving, getting vitamin D, sleeping, eating real food. If most people just focused on those, they would do, amazing. And then if you focus on those as the foundation for 20 or 30 years, that's the difference between like having cancer or not having cancer for a lot of people. Like it's really, really crazy actually that, we have all this mismatch and we have people getting sick on a regular basis. And we have pharmaceuticals trying to prop it up and big rabbit hole to go down. But I really, really want more people to just focus on the human animal, like the human biology. Like, a lot of it's like based on health tips and tricks and hacks and like buying superfoods. And even though like we do sell superfoods, for most people, it should only be added into a holistic plan based on your biology, right? Like you're not going to drink a smoothie or take some pill that's going to solve this, right? Like it has to be based on what you do on a daily basis.
This feels like a great moment to tell you about the two sponsors for this week's show, Wild Foods and Superfat. Great names, both of them, aren't they? This week, I'll mostly leave Colin to tell you all about Wild Foods, seeing as it's his baby. I did my unboxing last weekend and have been trying out some of the goodies during the week. I really love the wild black truffle salt on my morning scrambled eggs, and everyone's favourite seemed to be that mug with the slogan, full of their wild Peru coffee that I snapped a photo of. You can get yours with a 12% discount by using code KetoWoman at wildfoods.co. And don't forget the $100 giveaway you can enter by clicking the link on my links page at links.ketowomanpodcast.com. That's also where you'll find a 15% discount link for superfat.com, which you can get by using code DAISY at their checkout. I've got a variety pack, who doesn't love a variety pack, of their Superfat nut butter pouches to unbox and review, which I'll try and do this weekend. I may have already had a sneaky taste, so spoiler alert, they are really delicious. They are a certified keto and paleo line of macadamia and almond-based convenient on-the-go closable nut butter pouches with 5 different flavors including MCT probiotic, cacao coconut and nitro coffee MCT. I can see them being a great post-workout recharge if you are the energetic type, or just a quick and easy meal when you are out and about and don't have time to look for something keto. Go check them out for yourself at superfat.com and don't forget to use code DAISY to get your 15% discount. Now let's get back to Colin. And you mentioned you've got a young son. Tell us a bit about that and how you've approached that. How did you approach, not you obviously, but the pregnancy and then onto the breastfeeding and the weaning, and presumably this has all had a big influence on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been extremely fortunate that my partner is even more obsessed with these ideas than I am around child rearing. For me, it's more about helping the average person in health and that. And for her, obviously we talk about these ideas and she understands them, but she took it to the umpth level and getting into all the natural ways for childbirthing, for how to feed children. And now the one thing we are most bothly aligned on is probably feeding kids properly, right? And so, because this is the big one. I mean, and this is even something that I could see becoming a big part of the Wild mission is just education around real food for children, because kids are literally fed things, whether that's formula or fruit roll-ups or other crap that these food companies have designed and marketed to children. This is still considered normal, right? It's considered normal. It's not natural, but it's normal because everybody does it. And it's a really, really bad thing. I mean, if you look at the numbers, my son's generation is expected to have a shorter lifespan than mine. And that's true for all children living in modern industrialized societies that have the processed food that they do. That is not okay by me. No, it's not.
It should be the opposite, shouldn't it?
It really should be. And in fact, it has been until recently, right? We've been increasing the lifespan of humans basically since, modern medicine and all these things we've been able to do, like the past 100 years or so, right? It's the first time since then that the numbers are reversing, and that is a direct byproduct of our processed food and our mismatched environment. So for me, that's a big thing. That's a big thing we talk about. I put him on the story where we're feeding him grass-fed beef and we'll give him like he loves sauerkraut. Like I didn't start eating sauerkraut until I was 20, and he'll literally eat sauerkraut. Like it's amazing. And so I'm just really excited to really gift him with these habits that are going to take him through his entire life, right? Whereas kids that are on formula or even things like sleep training and all these other things that are not natural that she kind of knows more about than I do, it's amazing how many things that we do from C-sections to pregnancy to all the economics around it. It's amazing how many things we do with kids and having kids that is, again, mismatched to the way humans are designed. And it goes into everything, which is why I always bring it back to like, what is natural for the human species? What is natural? Like if you have a zoo and you have animals, they try to replicate the environment. Otherwise, the animals will get sick and die. And you can even see a lot of zoo animals are not happy because they're like confined. It's not natural. Well, humans are in a cage called our modern society, right? We've created it ourselves. And so we have to do everything we can to escape it as often as possible. The more we can escape it, the more we can bring some of the wild into our life and get into the wild ourselves, the better we're going to do, the better our kids are going to do, etc.
Yeah, and it seems to me so many of us have problems that are a result of patterns that started in our childhood. Yep. So that's really the defining time, isn't it? Where you either set someone up with an advantage or a disadvantage going forward.
100%. And even the genes of the mother and what she ate, they're showing, can have a child be set up for life to struggle with obesity or to struggle with addictions or these other things. I mean, it's it's one of those things that it's why I do what I do. Like I want to help as many people as possible. And in reality is like nobody's really protecting or even trying to champion for the children, right? Because these ideas, like kids aren't supposed to eat sugar, yet that's like the primary ingredient in almost every kid's food, and not many people are talking about it. Right. Because I know parents are stressed and they got bills and they got this and they got that. And like they can barely take care of their kids from a time perspective, let alone having to worry about like what they should be buying or prepping food at home. And, there's a lot of misconceptions around that. It's really not that hard to feed kids. You can basically feed them adult food. You just make a smaller portion. Right. But there's so much lack of information. Right. And there's so much lack of awareness about this. Like I can't even name one kind of celebrity person, maybe Jamie Oliver, he's doing pretty good at this, that is promoting nutrition for kids in like a ancestral based appropriate way. Like nobody's really doing it. And that's a huge, huge gap, I feel like.
Yeah. And it's, well, like you say, it's very important. And you mentioned Jamie Oliver there, and it's a real passion for him and something that he's desperately been trying to change for a long time.
Yep.
And made some headway too.
We need more people like him.
Yeah,
I wish he was bigger over in the States. Because, what he's doing is amazing. And we need that more.
Tell us a bit about, you've mentioned a few times, this is why I do what I do. So tell us about what you do.
Okay, so I'm CEO and founder of Wild Foods Co., based out of Austin, Texas. And we source really premium foods and supplements from small producers around the world. And that, the long story short, that started with me when I caught that CrossFit bug. I caught the paleo primal bug, and then I got really heavily into coffee, and I got heavily into intermittent fasting. And then when I made that connection between the better ingredients I put in my body, the better results I get, I was basically hooked. And then I wanted to understand why that was. And then so I dove deep into, evolutionary psychology, biology, ancestral, paleontology, everything. And I'm still reading books, on a daily basis on these topics. My mission now with Wild Foods is to kind of take these really good products, and it's what I use on a daily basis. I want to get other people using them, but I want them to be using them in a way that they understand why they're using them. And it's within a broader holistic approach to living wild, living as close to wild as close to nature as possible. So every single day, I'm thinking well, we sell products, but I really kind of think of us as an education company, right? Which is why getting on podcasts and doing things like this is just the best thing in the world for me, because I feel like I can reach people and they can really listen and understand. And we have the Ancestral Mind podcast. And so that's a lot of our focus is really educating people, whether they buy from us or not. I want them to, get outside more. I want them to stop feeding their kids sugar. I want them to make more food at home, buy a crock pot if you don't know how to cook. I want to really promote these ideas that are going to be the difference between whether our species kills itself or thrives, right? And they're all connected. The human body and brain is the most complex thing we've in the known universe, right? And yet there's still a lot of confusion about how to actually run it properly. There's no operating manual. A lot of it's passing on information that you heard from a friend or you saw in the news or whatever, or some book. And if you look at the nutrition trends and the research trends, what's happened in the past 30 years is salt and fat have finally kind of been exonerated, even though there's still a lot of work to be done there because the average person thinks fat is bad. If you watch any movie that references diet, they always still point to fat as being bad. And I'm every time I'm just cringe. I'm no, guys, come on, get with it. But that's still in the masses' consciousness. And so helping promote some of these ideas while also kind of expelling some of those bad ideas, right? That's a lot of what I do and what I try to do on a daily basis. And we use really good products around routines and habits to do that.
And so that's basically how it started, was it? You were sourcing things for yourself and presumably wanted to put them all together in a company rather than bits and pieces from here and there.
Yeah, I started with my first product was a non-denatured grass-fed whey protein because I was big into bodybuilding. So I was taking a lot of protein and whey and these different things, and I wanted to just find a really good source for myself. And so I had these 20 kilograms, right? So it's 44 pounds for those in the States. I had these big bakery bags delivered to my apartment in Austin, and I would open it up. Whey would go everywhere. I literally had whey all over my kitchen, right? And I would just take 1 or 2 scoops at a time. That brought my cost per unit down a lot, obviously. And then I thought, well, maybe other people will like this. This is a great product. I love it. So let me just ask some other people. And then I started selling on Amazon. And fulfillment by Amazon was a thing at the time. And so I really dove heavily into that. And to this day, we just used Amazon to really grow the brand and grow the product line. And now, we're actually in talks with Whole Foods and doing some other things in 2020. We have some really big plans. And even with my new partners I brought on to grow the company, I told them in the beginning, I'm guys, we just have to be obsessed with quality. If we are obsessed with quality, it's that first principle that will keep us being successful, right? Steve Jobs with Apple was obsessed with design and so they have to stay as close to that as possible. Our quality, our sourcing, so that if we have a product, I have to make sure I'll use it because I'm the highest standard I know for quality. Because if I don't think it's good enough, I won't put it in my body, and I definitely won't feed it to my kid, right? If we can adhere to that, we'll be successful. That's, so that's just the thing. We focus on that. And then we bring awareness to the brand by trying to educate people on all these ideas we're talking about today. And so that's really the strategy for the company. And that's a strategy for me and my mission in life. That's
what I like about your message is that combination. Yes. Okay. So you have products. And I think it's really important to support these companies and these people with these passions who are putting the products out there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it is the products that are helping push the message forward. And ultimately, people like products.
Yeah. And they're going to keep buying them. So they might as well buy something that's better for the environment and better for themselves.
Exactly. But like you say, it's packaging that up with the message. Yeah, this is a great product as part of all the other things you do that are nothing to do with us. Then they're not anything we're trying to sell you. This is what we're advising, like you say, that it's the education, it's the message you're trying to put out.
A good example of that is intermittent fasting, right? So intermittent fasting was kind of like the second aha moment for me. And when I talk about it, I don't talk about it as a weight loss gimmick or as a tip or a trick. I talk about it as a first principle of human health. Our ancestors didn't have access to grocery stores or food preservation or any of these things. They would go periods of time without food. This is just the way it was, right? And therefore, that's why all the fasting research is nearly universally positive, right? Because it's just one of those big first principles of health. And so I sell products that you consume, but I also promote that at times you should consume nothing.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like one of those funny things, and I would love it if you had our coffee in the morning, let's say, but then you fasted, didn't have breakfast, or you skipped it completely and you just didn't have coffee this morning, or you skip, a meal and you don't use our pink salt or whatever. Right. And so it's always about the ideas first and just promoting those ideas to get more people doing these things and then teaching these things. It's like the pay it forward. That's the way I think of it. Is if I can get one person to like develop like one habit, whether it's fasting or cutting out sugar or cutting out grains, that person is more likely to help a coworker or friend, and they're more likely to teach a son or daughter. And then from there, we can really spread these ideas and hopefully reverse a trend, because like we're still on a downward trend for our health. Like we're on a downward trend, like, because we're talking about big numbers here. We're talking about millions and millions of people, right? I think eventually, if with enough awareness, with enough of podcasts like this, with enough of the internet reaching people and just really educating the masses, I think we can reverse a trend. And then the food companies, when that happens, will have to respond, because nobody's going to be buying their crap products anymore. But we have a long way to go.
Yeah, and I guess the way to change it is with the kids who are coming up through it. I mean, it's a bit of a way ahead to think about it, but in some ways, you're in that place now where you can completely control what your son is eating.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What's going to happen when he's out there at school with friends and things, and all these other things that you don't want him eating? He's going to be exposed to those. How are you going to educate him to find his way through that in a healthy way?
We've thought about this a lot. I'll just give my ideas on it. So some of the paleo, like Rob Wolf, he's a paleo guy. Mm-hmm. He's talked about how his kids, they will, because they eat this way at home, like, 90% of the time, whatever, if they happen to go to a friend's house and they're offered cake, it is so cloyingly sweet to them that they will take a bite and they're like, I don't want that. Right. So I think developing a palate, especially if you develop it from when they're literally able to chew whole food, like if all they've ever had is whole food, right, they have a more balanced palate, so that artificial food tastes artificial. Right. Now, of course, if you feed a kid junk food for a year, he or she's going to develop a palate for that junk food. But if you develop them out with a palate that doesn't have that on a regular basis, I think for the most part, nature will kind of take its course. Like our biology and our intuition and the things for the human animal is always smarter than our consciousness, right? So I think it's one of those things that they'll figure it out. That being said, he's not probably going to traditional public school, so we're going to be able to control a lot of that ourselves. But I just think also educating him a lot too. I think kids don't get credit for their intelligence. I think if you talk to them in whole sentences and you explain things to them, they will get it. Even if they don't get it at the conscious level, there's almost like a subconscious understanding that they'll get, right? And so I want him to really understand why he shouldn't want to eat certain things. Not necessarily say, you better not eat that or else, right? I want to give him the empowerment to make that decision. And then maybe he'll teach some of his friends about it, right? And I think that's the way to do it. I think you don't try to restrict them, because anytime you restrict the human animal, we tend to revolt, right? Yeah. This is a biology thing, because our ancestors were very egalitarian. No one person was above the other. It was equal all around. And so I think when you tell people what to do too much, and I know from my past, from school and from things, like I never did well with authority. Like I was always like my way type thing. I want to give him that same flexibility to kind of make up his own mind, give him the information to make a good decision, and then let him decide for the most part, versus trying to force it in some other way. And so that's going to be our strategy. I mean, this is all speculation because I don't know what's going to happen. But for the most part, I'm going to develop an appreciation for real food in him as early as possible and as often as possible. And now that we're moving to the 10 acres, I think it's only going to aid in that. And I think that will probably be the best defense, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think you're right, just developing his palate. It brought to mind something my brother did that always used to make us laugh. I remember my mum asking him what he wanted for his birthday lunchbox, I think, at school. And he asked for smoked salmon and cream cheese sandwiches. So, sometimes it depends what palate you've grown up with.
I mean, it's what you grow up with, Like, yeah.
That's what he wanted.
That's funny.
You're obviously young, you're full of energy, you're an entrepreneur. Has all this helped with your mindset and your productivity in what you do? It seems like you've achieved great things in a short period of time.
Yeah, they say, every overnight success is 10 years in the making. And I've been doing this entrepreneur thing for about 12 years. So it's very true. I've gotten a lot better over the years. My productivity, I've been talking about this recently with some friends, like my productivity is just at another level. But what people don't understand about a lot of these things is it's a process, and everybody wants a tip, a hack, a productivity tool, an app. But the reality is having first principles of productivity and having a way you think and having, an understanding and self-awareness, these big ideas are going to direct everything. And so, as far as ancestral goes, ancestral mindset, there's an entire branch of new science, evolutionary psychology, right? Evolutionary biology is a little bit more accepted and older, but evolutionary psychology is kind of a newer science that there's more research going into. And it's actually the most fascinating for me because I can easily picture what it's like in the wild if I were to wander around the wild myself, and like, let's say I have a group of my friends and we have to survive in the wild. I have an idea of what that would look like, right? And I have an idea of some of the physical struggles and those type of things. But the psychology aspect, how would I share and manage the other people in the tribe and their different motives and incentives? Like, how would I mitigate that or manage that and keep things as even as possible, which is something our ancestors did. And then you have things like mating and sex and child rearing and all these different things that our ancestors did very well, because that's why we're here today. Like, they were successful, right? They were at the top of the food chain. That is one of those things that fascinates me a lot. So anytime I have a chance to read about evolutionary psychology or even think about it, it's one of those things that I spend a lot of time on, and I try to make connections between like work and productivity and marketing, branding, education, all these things that we're doing even right now. There's a lot of psychology around these things. Like, obviously, as a for-profit company, right? Even a for-profit company with a purpose, I still have to make profit. I have to reach new customers and I have to do all these things, right? So I have to understand, how do people think, like what captures their attention? And now with the internet, we have more distraction than ever. So it's harder than ever to get and keep people's attention. So knowing as much as you can about yourself and other humans, it's just a superpower. I mean, all of us have to deal with people, and all of us probably have the greatest stress in our life at the hands of other people. That's another thing people don't really understand, or maybe they don't think about that often, right? Most of the drama in our lives, most of the heartache and these things are at the hands of other people, whether that's losing somebody, whether that's a failed relationship, whether that's somebody that's out to get you, or there's some politicking going on or whatever at the workplace. Humans are that's another first principle of human biology, is we were always around other humans, right? And so this is always the thing that's really fascinating to me. And, as it applies to, I would say, work and business and productivity, is if you can be good with people, and that kind of starts with knowing yourself, right? You have to really become self-aware to be good with people. It's one of those things, because if you're not self-aware, you're going to do and say all these things, and it's going to cause problems, and you're not really know what's going on. So like, self-awareness is a key. But if you can be good with people, you can accomplish anything in this earth. Like, even someone like Steve Jobs, who used to talk about how he wanted to be the dumbest person in the room, because then he knew he was in the right room. He was in a room where he could learn and where he could, and he would even hire those people, right? He wanted to hire the people that were smarter than him. It is imperative that we are good with people, and that's just one of those universals. And so, there's a lot of different things to unpack with it, but it's, we could look at things like jealousy, for example, jealousy and the us versus them. So those are kind of common things. Well, humans in the wild, if we came across another band of humans, let's say we're wandering around and we come across this other band of humans that, they have spears, they have maybe different piercings and tattoos. They look kind of intimidating. We don't speak the same language, so we can't communicate. Well, the best way to approach that situation for our ancestors would have been to be very, very, very careful, because even if 9 out of 10 times these other people were safe and you could maybe communicate with them or barter with them, that 1 out of 10 that was dangerous would have wiped your entire tribe out. They would have killed you, and they would have taken your women and children, right? So our ancestors it's programmed into us to kind of think tribalistically, which is us versus them. If you look at soccer, or football, if you look at politics, why do a lot of things end up being like a very defined us versus them? And people then dig in, and then you have things like cognitive biases, and you have all these issues of the brain that were evolutionary advantages in the wild. Today, they are evolutionary disadvantages. They are modern day disadvantages. The idea that it's hard for us to kind of hold conflicting ideas in our mind. The idea that it's really hard for us to change our mind, the idea that it's really hard to admit mistakes, like we have ego protection and things like that. These are all things that in a small hunter-gatherer band living in the wild were conducive for group survival. And that's really the big idea here, is that humans evolved in groups. We evolved to have mechanisms that protected the group because natural selection selected for the group, not the individual. But in today's world, the individual can go out and be a lone wolf. He or she can go out and make billions of dollars and hoard resources. And there's not that much of even if there's a negative connotation, there's no physical risk, right? In the wild though, and this is probably the big idea for this long-winded answer, in the wild, if you were to hoard resources, you would be expelled or killed. That's just a universal. We've even seen that in modern day hunter-gatherers that we've observed in like the 60s and 70s. There was even, like if you became a drain on the group, there was even a guy that I've read that would go around and club you when you weren't looking, and he'd basically kill you. Like that kind of stuff happened. And it's really brutal. But guess what? The nature's brutal. Like look at the animal kingdom. It's brutal. These selection pressures select for what is going to propagate the species in this environment. And that is where our biology is still stuck. So you see all the things on the internet, what it's allowed. It's allowed for revolutions. It's allowed for sharing of ideas. It's allowed for more heated divisiveness between Republicans and Democrats or whatever. And all that is it's allowed for an expression of human psychology in a way that our ancestors would have never had to deal with. And if you even look at modern, since we were farmers, like you had religion and you had city-states and you had war, humans, they've actually observed that humans are one of the only species that will go out and systematically kill members of its own species. There's almost no other animal in the animal kingdom that does that. There's one ant species that will go out and just like decimate other ants, but humans are the most vicious, the most dangerous, the most violent species in nature. It's because humans were not designed to ever live in an environment where we had resources and we would hoard them, and we would have pressure of other groups in other areas, and we would have to fight over scarce resources. That's why we are here today and all the problems we have. That's the reason why. Like it's exactly correlate to that. And so I'm hoping we evolve out of this, right? Like maybe 100 years with the internet, we can eventually change. I mean, culturally, we've had a lot of evolution. Like we haven't had nuclear war. We haven't had even a world war in a while. Whether that remains to be seen, I don't know. But we are definitely culturally evolving. But the thing is our biology is still stuck in the wild.
Yeah. And like you say, it's this natural tendency. I was just thinking when you're mentioning tribes and this tribal thing, see, it really cuts both ways. Like you're saying, you get the us versus them, which it doesn't matter what area you're in, there always seems to be these groups that have to battle with each other, be it in keto, be it in paleo, be it in whatever. There's always these groups that just have to argue with each other. But there's the brilliant side of tribes as well, with finding your tribe, finding like-minded people that you can get support from. And that's particularly relevant with the internet. I'm a great example. I don't have many people who understand the way I eat and get it here in my real life environment, if you like, but I found tribes online.
Totally.
But I definitely have to stay away from, because I'm quite an argumentative type, I definitely have to stay away from that battling as well. So it really, it cuts both ways, doesn't it? You get really good things from it, but you get really divisive things too.
Yeah. And I think we can mitigate that. I mean, the human brain is fascinating. And what we've been able to do as humans from technology and now sending rockets and satellites, and it's amazing what we've been able to accomplish. And so we just have to do better at overcoming our demons. And a lot of our demons are biological. And that's the thing. Like there's so much shame on the internet and like people trying to shame people and make things politically correct and whatever. But when I look at that, I just kind of like, I laugh and I'm sad at the same time because it is a complete detachment from the human animal. When a tiger kills something to eat because it has to survive. We don't put a moral thing around it, right? But when humans do one of a million things, we put all these moral and these idealistic things around it. And yes, that's good. We have to have standards and we have to evolve culturally. And, we will even evolve biologically, but it might take 1,000 years, right? But we also need to understand where we come from, right? We need to understand what are the mechanisms at place here. Instead, you just see a lot of name calling and a lot of yelling and screaming and bickering and fighting. And you don't really make any inroads because people aren't talking about anything on the same page. Like if we could at least agree on humans are vicious, dangerous people. We have tribalistic tendencies. We have even racist tendencies, which sometimes can be rooted in fear and tribalism, right? Let's understand these. Let's unpack these. And then let's have productive discussions about ways to mitigate them. Instead of just trying to say, you're bad, or like we should cancel your show because you said this one comment because you're a human animal and humans make a lot of freaking mistakes, right? Cancel culture just irks me like crazy. We need to have a better way to discuss these things. And I think, we're at like 1.0 of the internet and a lot of these ideas. And I think there's going to be a major evolution through all of it. There's going to be a lot of struggle through all of it as well. And, like anything, we're an evolving species. Like that's what people tend to forget. Just because we've left nature for the most part and we can live in cities doesn't mean that like evolution or natural selection just stops, right? Like every single day we're writing history. That's why I'm optimistic. I think it's a great time to be alive. And with the technologies and all these things, I'm really excited for the future, but I'm not under any delusions that it's going to be a perfect linear straight path either. Like there's still a lot of major things that can happen. Like we could destroy the environment or nuclear war could happen, or like there's a lot of really, really dangerous things that can happen. And so, fingers crossed that for my son that we can just kind of stay on at least a safe path,
Yeah, and then this whole divisive thing and pitting groups against each other is getting a little out of control all over the place. We have our own problems over on this side of the pond too. And it's very worrying times, isn't it? But I think you're right. And I think it's a really interesting perspective. And I can see why you have it, why you keep relating back to that ancestral point of view as a really good way of understanding, pulling apart, taking just away all those layers that everything modern has added and just taking it back to the basics to try and get a really good understanding. And like you say, that could be a really good place to just start conversations and listen, actually listen to people.
Yep. Humans were very, very good at making things complex. We're not as good at making things simple, surprisingly, even though simple is what we need to be able to have intelligent, constructive conversations. Even with diet, to bring it back to that, it's like everyone wants like a trick, a gimmick, a hack, or some complex meal plan or whatever. But the easy answer is buy raw ingredients, prep them at home. Don't let restaurants and the crappy seed oils they use, and you have no idea what's going on behind closed doors. Don't let them do it, right? And don't let the corporations do it that put in a box, right? Take it home, prep it yourself, cook it yourself, season it yourself, and then eat it. And then buy as local as possible. And for the stuff you can't get locally, buy the really good ingredients from small suppliers, like Wild Foods, for example. And that is the answer to like most of the chronic disease, most of the issues. And then you supplement that with sleep, getting outside, and as much movement as possible. I just basically painted in a few sentences what every human needs to do to be a healthy, thriving human. Yet we still have multi-billion-dollar industries selling diet books and bad information and supplements and things that people don't fundamentally need, or at least isn't going to solve all their problems and is only a supplement. We just got to get back to the basics. We have to keep it simple.
Yeah, so true. Well, you've mentioned a few things about where we can find you, but just let's reel them all off. You've mentioned some podcasts. I know you're involved in 2 or 3 podcasts, but let's find out where we can find out more.
Yeah, the best place is to go to theancestralmind.com, and that's going to have that Living Wild PDF that everyone can download. It's a quick, easy reference. You can scroll through it, print it out, whatever. It's just a good reminder of the basics with some tips for each of those as well.
Yeah, perfect. I'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Okay, great. Yeah, and that will link you to the podcast as well. And you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Google, all those different areas. And then Wild Foods is wildfoods.co. And if you guys have any questions or comments about any products or anything, contact us there. Or anybody listening can shoot me an email to colin@wildfoods.co. And then I'm also on Instagram a little bit at Colin Stuckert.
Perfect. Well, maybe you could leave us with a top tip. You've dropped lots of tips, but what would your top tip be?
I've been playing poker recently, okay? I used to play poker when I was younger. And so I've been playing poker a little bit in my downtime. And a lot of the guys in the game ask me for advice, right? And so what I find myself saying often, and this isn't more a tip, it's just kind of a way of thinking. They're just like, what do I eat, right? And so in a very, very simple kind of few sentences, I try to iterate like, focus on eliminating the sugar first. That's always the number one thing. And then eliminate the grains. If most people did just those two things, if they just read the label and they count how much sugar per serving or how many grains or carbs per serving or whatever, and then obviously look at the ingredient list because there's a lot of really crappy preservatives and things that they put in manufactured food. If you focused on just reducing those, right? And even try counting them. Like when I was counting how, like I was eating at Whole Foods a lot, I was eating a lot of foods that were like kind of sweet and I was getting dark chocolate. I was counting my sugar load. It was out of control. And I was being cognizant of it, right? For people that aren't even paying attention, I would guesstimate most people are eating like 50 to 100 grams of sugar a day and they don't even realize it.
Yeah.
Count and look at the labels and just focus on eliminating that as much as you can. And then obviously get a crock pot and just cook food at home. Like even if it's one meal a day that you just throw in a crock pot and it's ready to go when you get home for dinner, for some people that could add 5 to 10 years to your life.
And it's amazing how tasty just really simple things can be. Like you say, just throw
delicious.
Everything in one pot. Tastes great. Well, fantastic. It's been really interesting talking to you. It's been great getting to know you a bit better. Thank you for sharing your time with me.
Thank you very much for having me. And I will come back on in the future and we'll talk again.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. To get the resources and links from this show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com/episodes. Please share this podcast with as many people as possible by sharing one of my links or just taking a screenshot of an episode that you enjoyed. Reviews really help raise the profile of the podcast, which gets it in front of more people, but also helps me attract a wide variety of guests. So please take a minute to leave a review on whichever podcast app or platform you like to listen on. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support really does mean the world to me. Thank you. Are you enjoying this podcast? Help me make more episodes and videos by making a pledge at my Patreon page, patreon.com/KetoWoman. Or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman Podcast website. Don't forget to join in the fun on the Keto Woman Podcast Instagram and Facebook pages, and Daisy_Keto Woman on Twitter. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you would like to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. This week's end quote is from Drake. Sometimes it's the journey that teaches you a lot about the destination. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.